Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. Good night in some cases. The Telegraph has published a document, an article in regards to the fact that trans NHS staff can treat patients who request same-sex care for intimate procedures. This is a topic that is not going away until it is put right, I should say. A couple of things about this. First off, there's a link to my Substack article. I say article, it's more like a link repository, which will be in the comments section of this YouTube video. And I urge you to go and look at what is on that list of resources that I provided for this video. I'm particularly grateful to the work of a number of people in this field in regards to the treatment of women, particularly women who are disabled or have been diagnosed with serious psychological or psychiatric conditions. Not least of all, whom is Dr. M. The links are again all in the Substack. Please do visit. Is Dr. M and Henrietta Freeman, who have both written passionately about a subject of which they have the utmost right to be concerned. Let's start with the Telegraph article, and then I will read something that Henrietta has written, which I think it would be something you should listen to. Okay, so trans NHS staff can treat patients who request same-sex care for intimate procedures. One NHS trust said it is unable to guarantee patients will be treated by a clinician of the same sex if required, according to a think tank. Now, the think tank in question is the Policy Exchange, who've done a report on this. And again, the links are all on the Substack so that you've got everything that you need. It was essentially a letter was written by a former chief executive of the trust, one Evelyn Barker. And this was in February 2021, so this has been around for a while. It also suggests in the letter that the trust does not require clinicians to disclose their sex. Now, I can't imagine, because I don't have to. And it's really a stretch of empathy, and we should all make that stretch, to understand a situation where, through various different ticks in the law, including one called Godwin, or Goodwin, I think it was, which I'll again, the link in the Substack, which essentially meant that men could be women. And that didn't happen yesterday. That happened a long time ago. Have a look at the Goodwin judgment in the Substack. That happened a long time ago. So it's very hard for me to empathise with, although I want to try, a woman with a severe psychological issue, or someone who has been in situations where she has been abused, usually by men, as we know, and then finds themselves in a situation where they are in a psychiatric care situation, where they do not have capacity, where they have been sectioned, quite possibly, where they do not have the ability to leave, where they are at their most vulnerable. They're most vulnerable. The very fact that this letter exists, the very fact that this conversation is taking place, is a devastating failure of safeguarding of women, particularly women in that situation. I find it hard to imagine the horror of having been perhaps abused, perhaps suffering psychological and psychiatric problems that may well have been caused or exacerbated by that abuse, to then be in a situation where you cannot be sure that you're not being touched by a man. What kind of society allows this to happen? What kind of society allows men to do this? And I don't care what the Gender Recognition Act or any other rubbish that came straight out of the law book of history says. Any man, no matter what his psychological problem, who thinks this is okay, is a man who needs watching. it's a massive safeguarding fail. Let's go on for a moment. It's hard to put this into words, by the way. In response to a series of complaints from a member of the public regarding the trust policies and practices, Ms Barker set out how it secures informed patient consent in accordance with the law. How do you give informed consent if you're 24-hour non-verbal care? How do you give informed consent if you are so psychologically disturbed and so unwell that you've been sectioned by the state for your own care? You're a woman, you're in a psychiatric unit, the state sanctions you, and then the state sanctions men to pretend they are women and carry out your intimate care. The letter said the details about the clinicians involved in a patient's treatments may be relevant to a patient when making informed consent. Maybe. However, there is no requirement for clinicians to disclose their gender identity. This nonsense about gender identity in the NHS goes way back. Way back. Way back when they began conflating the two. Again, the links are in the Substack. Do have a look at the conflation that has occurred so that you can understand this more fully. There is no requirement for clinicians to declare their identity. It's beyond me. It added in this letter that this may not always accord with the physical sex appearance of the chest or genitalia. I mean, by pulling this idea of a human being as a whole creature, as a gestalt, to pieces, they can say shit like this. This may not always accord with the physical sex appearance of the chest or genitalia. So they're asking you to disbelieve your eyes. They're lying to women in psychiatric care, disabled women, and those who need 24-hour care or are non-verbal and unable to express what they feel for various reasons. And they're saying that this may not always accord with the physical sex appearance of the chest or genitalia. What is wrong with these people? In the report, which again the links are in the Substack, the NHS is seriously compromised. That's the only way to look at this. This is an abject failure of safeguarding for vulnerable women. And this is the women. What about the vulnerable children, for that matter? Right? Somebody's going in and saying that they're a woman when in fact they're a man. And they're doing so by stealth. This is the priestly class set above others, beyond safeguarding. So Nimco Ali, who's a former government advisor and women's rights activist, said the letter provided more evidence that reveals the NHS to be seriously compromised by an ideology that is diminishing the rights of women and girls. Nimco Ali is far more measured in the statement than I would be. She then added, of course, transgender people also face a very real type of discrimination and the law must protect them and enable them to live their lives freely. It does. The law does protect them. Though there's no such thing as transgender. It's transection in the law, by the way. There is no conflicting right. There is safeguarding here. Decisions must be made with the full understanding that certain policies cannot be blindly endorsed simply because one minority is shouting the loudest for them. You do not get to pretend you're a woman. We're going to get this out of the law. Right? We're going to get this out of the law. Because this is hurting the most vulnerable in our societies. We're talking about women who are incapable of consenting due to not being able, non-capacitous, maybe extreme learning difficulties. You don't think that coma pregnancies are a thing? You're living in cloud cuckoo land. The state removes their capacity, right? Really removed it. And those hospitals have a heightened duty of care, and safeguarding should be the first principle, not somebody's gender bloody identity. By default, these people are vulnerable. I was talking to a friend the other day who is training to be a mental health nurse. And this friend of mine was working in the psychiatric ward locally. And he said to me, young man, that the sexual behaviour of the men in the psychiatric ward towards him was difficult. But what he saw towards the women was another ballgame altogether. That's the patience. That's why we separate people. That's why we should have separate wards, right? Because men, by their very nature, unfortunately, are the ones that cause the problem, right? Sexual assault, vast majority men, rare in women. And even when it does occur, there's often a man involved. It's bizarre. So you've got women who are vulnerable, who need acute psychiatric care, often been sexually abused by their partners. Have a look at the Substack and see what you make of it, because you need to. All right, this is very serious. Very serious indeed. The article then continues to explain how under informed consent, a patient can refuse treatment at any time if they are dissatisfied with the clinician. How do they know? What if they're not well enough? What if they're non-capacity? What if they don't have the capacity? What if they've been sectioned? What if the state has removed their autonomy? You will be watched by this nurse. You will have your smear test done by the nurse, even though the nurse has got a moustache and a pair of bollocks. It continues, the implications of policy are considerable. Some people can't consent. Some people can't dissent. The most vulnerable are our society. It goes on to rattle on that letter about people being fully transitioned. It makes no difference. They're still men. None at all. This tactic's been going on for a long time, and in the very rich seam of information which is provided in the Substack by Dr. M, will, I think, inform you perhaps in a way that you've not been informed before, and I hope that's worthwhile. Henrietta Freeman, the other individual who I shall include into the Substack, will also be very much worth you reading. But I'm going to read something from Henrietta herself in order to hammer home the point that this is a major safeguarding risk and this is a major issue, and it's been going on for a very long time, and it's men that have been driving it. Men that have been driving it. This is Henrietta's own words. In the morning, I had my ventilator taken off and I'm repositioned in bed. I have my drugs given through my PEG tube by my carer. Brackets, normally mum, as I want someone I know, but sometimes my carer is done by agency carers who can nowadays be men. My drugs leave me zombified, so you can imagine as someone who's paralysed from the chest down with upper body weakness, I'm pretty vulnerable. If a carer was to be a predatory man, there's his chance to take full advantage. There are links in the work by Henrietta detailing where this has happened again and again. One NHS hospital denied that there was a trans LARPing bloke on one of the wards, and a woman was raped. And after the rape, they continued to deny it. You will find these links in the Substack articles that I'm providing for you today. Henrietta then continues. Carers let themselves into my house whilst I'm in bed. I have a short-term memory issue, so if something were to happen, I won't remember until a few days after. Say a man sexually assaulted me or raped me, I wouldn't know until, heaven forbid, I ended up pregnant or unwell. This has happened. This has happened. It's always been a thing. Then it's the washing. I'll never get used to it after years of intimate care and knowing I'll need it forever. You never get used to someone else washing your intimate areas. It's the bit which really reminds me of my disability. Whilst I'm not embarrassed, put yourself in that situation. I can't feel anything from above my boobs and down. My condition is progressive. When I was able to feel, it wasn't as bad having someone washing me, as I knew what they were doing. Now it's 100% trust given over. I only have women doing this currently, but I know it could be a bloke who turns up. Imagine the fear you might feel if you were expecting a carer. You know they have open access to your house, and you know they could be a man, even if you requested same-sex care. I know disabled women who've had blokes turn up. Fortunately, they can turn them away, but I can't. After my wash, I am dressed, and if I feel well enough, I am helped out of bed. Again, this is close contact. I have a catheter but require help with other toileting. And then Henrietta warns us, if you're squeamish, I suggest you skip the next paragraph. But it needs to be told to emphasise the intimacy of the care. I'm not skipping it. You don't get that get out card. After my wash, I am dressed, and if I feel well enough, I am helped out of bed. Again, this is close contact. I have a catheter but require help with other toileting. I use a peristine pump, affectionately known as a poo pump. Basically, it's a catheter that goes up my bum, fills with water and allows me to go to the loo. Accidents are rare, but it still happens, and this involves changing me. Being changed and washed is by far the bit I find hardest. Why? Because this intimate personal care is a total giving over of trust and a lack of dignity. Even with women and my own mum, I find it hard. However, I do not have the luxury of stepping away. It's necessary. I don't pity myself because I'm fortunate compared to other women. My ventilator is put on. This is in the evening. So that means I struggle to speak, and if a predatory male carer decides to do something, I'm in bed unable to defend myself or shout for help. In the night, my catheter might bypass, which means changing me again. I say this not out of wanting pity, but to show people who decide to pass judgment on disabled women wanting same-sex care and call us bigots what it's actually like for me and many other women. I hope politicians, I'm looking, she says, at Scotland especially, read this and develop some understanding, but most of all compassion. If you're a politician or a virtue signaller, think of yourself in my shoes when you say trans women are women, or any other unscientific nonsense that you've chosen to believe. When you vote for self-ID, you make it much easier for a predatory male to identify as female and do my intimate same-sex care. Disability can happen to everyone, and old age happens to us all. You may need intimate personal care one day. If you don't care about what I've said, come back to me when you're in my situation. It'll be interesting to know what you think. That's an extraordinary piece of writing. Again, links for you to read it. I noticed that the usual suspects on Twitter were then quite happy to jump in and say, "No, all men are predators. That's not the point. That's not the point. Safeguarding treats everybody the same." And it's extraordinary to see all these people who are so interested in equality and inclusivity thinking that they can be excluded from safeguarding. And a safeguarding red flag to me is a man who wants to carry out intimate care on women who are either unable to speak, unable to move, women who have the need for the most intimate kind of care as has been described today, and to do so by pretending they're a woman. The GRA needs to go. We need to get the ECHR. The ECHR precedent and laws need to be out of our system altogether. We need to get back to reality. We need to get back to understanding that you can only be the man or woman and you've got to live with the body you've got. We need to get back to ensuring the safety of women, the most vulnerable, those who've been sectioned, those who have been told by the state they have no capacity. For the state to tell them that they have no capacity, and then for the state to say, that's okay, you're fair game for men, is something that none of us should be able to live with.